Welcome back to another episode of the Trauma Queen podcast. I am your host, Jessica Alla. Today I'm talking about the disorder that I didn't know I had for the first 30 years of my life, and who I am constantly getting messages from women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s saying, I've just been diagnosed, and it's been missed. And it's been missed for so long because it can be really hard to detect, especially if you haven't experienced it and been through it yourself, which is part of the reason why so many women who are being diagnosed are so confused about how to heal, because the people who are writing the protocols for how to heal this disorder haven't actually had it themselves. So the disorder that I'm talking about, if you haven't guessed it already by the name of the title of this episode, is Dissociative Identity Disorder, DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. This disorder for me looked like missing entire chunks of time. It looked like constantly fighting between these two versions of myself that neither of them felt like me. I would be acting a certain way and living a certain way only to then shift into my other side, personality, alter, whatever you want to call it. I'd shift and all of a sudden I'd be so confused about why I was acting, speaking, living a certain way. And then I'd literally have to recalibrate my entire life. And then I would shift, something would trigger me to move back into my other side. And then I would be so confused again about why I was living that way. And I would just be moving from side to side. And I was never truly me. I was never truly who I was, my sense of self, my true self. I was just flipping for decades between these two really strong protective personalities that were almost polar opposite. Now, obviously, some of you might have multiple different personalities with names, and mine definitely had names. I'm going to talk about mine soon, but I definitely had names, and they definitely had characteristics, and they were very identified. Some of you might have multiple. Now, it doesn't matter how many you have. It matters how strong they are. And it also matters that you change your perception around healing, because the amount of women that I get messaging me saying, how do you manage your DID? That's the first little prick in my mind is when someone says manage, I'm like, no, we don't manage, we fix, we heal. Because the messaging out there from the people that haven't had it is that you just have to learn how to live with it. You have to learn how to manage it. You can medicate it, or you can do certain therapies that will help, but there's no way to actually fix it. Now, I want you to believe that you can actually fix it. Because if we think about the mind, and the mind takes whatever we believe to be true and makes that our reality, if you only believe that you can manage it, and you only believe that you can live to a certain level of happiness and freedom, then that's what you're going to experience, and that's what you're going to see. So the first thing that I want you to do is keep an open mind, because what you've been taught about DID may have been taught to you from people who haven't had DID, from people who haven't actually helped anyone heal it. I've not only healed myself, but I've now healed many other women from DID as well by the method that I'm going to talk to you about, by the same way that I healed my own DID. So there's a lot of people out there who still don't believe that it's a real thing. And if you've got those people in your life who say to you, it's made up, it's just people seeking attention, it's not real, or on the flip side of that, it's just a label for somebody who's crazy, which I've heard many times, especially when it was multiple personality disorder, people would be like, that's just schizophrenia, they're just crazy, it's not a personality disorder. It actually is. It's been studied. It's been put into the DSM as a personality disorder, and it is now actually a legitimate personality disorder. So for anybody in your life who is saying that it's not real, it's for attention, they're not believing you, you can send them this episode, and I will tell them right now to fuck off for you on your behalf, with love, of course. But anybody who doesn't believe, that's a whole other episode. Before I get into my experience of being diagnosed and actually healing through it, what is DID? Dissociative Identity Disorder. I hate the word disorder. I don't know about you, but I hate the word disorder. It's not disorder. There's nothing wrong with you. There's no, there is a disorder in, a disorder of the brain, but the word disorder is so stigmatized. I think that I would love to call it like a fragmentation for survival. Like that's what's actually happening. We're fragmenting our parts, our sense of self, our personality in order to survive. So the first example that I thought about, I'll come back to what DID is. The best way for me to explain to you how this can relate to everyday people is that each of us develop a personality around who we believe that we have to be in order to be loved. And that is just a normal human thing that is happening. Every person out there who doesn't have a personality disorder, their personality is made up of who they think they have to be in order to be loved. So they've got these different expressions of self or parts that make up this self that are like, I am this way, I am that way, I have to be this, I have to be that. So they have different characteristics, different traits that they embody that they believe will allow them to be loved and accepted by the people around them. People with DID and people with chronic, complex childhood trauma, they're not necessarily, there is a part that needs to be loved. There is a personality that needs to be loved, but a lot of their personality is alters and a lot of their makeup is not so much out of this desire for love, but for safety and protection. So when the child has no option to escape their environment, they have to escape it mentally. And the way to escape it mentally, especially if your abuse is coming from a caregiver, is to create multiple different realities so that you can exist, so that you can survive, so that you can cope in that environment. So the splitting, the fragmentation is a survival mechanism. It's actually not a disorder. There's actually not anything wrong with you. Your brain's actually fucking amazing. Your brain's actually doing exactly what it needs to do in order to protect you, in order to survive. And there are so many people with DID who haven't gone down the path of drugs, alcohol, addiction, things like that, because their DID saved them. So I even want you to have a look at, how has DID served you? Because if you're constantly frustrated by it, angry at it, thinking that you can't heal it, it's a problem, it's a disorder, there's something wrong with you, that the energetics of that alone are terrible, but that mentality isn't going to help you. What needs to happen is we need to shift into a mentality of, how did this protect me? How did this serve me? And what is the purpose of these parts? Because until you find the role or the purpose of that part, you're not going to be able to heal it. So somebody asked me the other day, they said to me that in their team at work, there was this common thread amongst all the therapists that you shouldn't speak directly to alters. And my response to her was, how the fuck are you supposed to heal the alters? How the fuck are you supposed to understand what those alters and those personalities and those parts need and why they were created and what they're there for if you're not if you're ignoring them? Ignoring them makes them worse. Their idea was that indulging or communicating with the alters further amplifies them and strengthens them. But yeah, maybe if you're speaking to them just generally, but you're not actually, and you're encouraging them to exist in that state, yeah. But if you're talking to them in the correct brainwave from a perspective of let's get to the root cause of why you're here and what you're doing and find you a new role, then absolutely you should be talking to those parts, personalities, and alters with a qualified therapist. So, DID, if you look at it from the lens of psychology, the narrative is that, or I guess the characteristics of it is that it is characterized by the presence of two or more distinct identity states or alters, accompanied by gaps in memory, dissociative amnesia, and disruptions to the sense of self. Now, this is also not 100% accurate in that a lot of people with DID don't actually really know their true sense of self because they are living completely in survival between all of their parts. They would have experienced the self and you would have experienced the self at some point in your life. And once you start to work with it and know it, you will find it coming back out, but it can be so buried underneath so many alters or personalities or parts that it can take time to get there. And one thing that I need you to shift your mindset around is that it does take time with something like DID. DID is complex. It has come from complex trauma. And what makes complex trauma complex to me is the sheer volume. It's the fact that the trauma was most of the time during formative years, but it is also the volume. It's not like there was one traumatic incident that happened that created this ripple. It was hundreds of incidents that created your personality, that created who you are. It's not like something happened to you anymore. It's like the trauma becomes a part of your makeup. So in order to essentially working with DID to me is identity work. It's working with identities. It's working with parts. It's working with protection. It's working with who you had to become in order to survive. And that's not just one person. That had to, for some people with DID, be multiple people. And I know this myself in that, I would be who I had to be in order to be safe around my father, because who I had to be around my father wasn't the same every day. I had to be different people in order to survive different situations. And I think this is what people don't realize, is that the personalities are developed out of necessity. As I mentioned before, they're developed out of necessity, but they don't know that their roles aren't still relevant. Their inner child parts, their younger parts, they don't know that you're a grown-up now. They don't know that you're actually out of that situation. How do they not know that you're out of that situation? How do they not know that your abuser isn't going to come into the room at any moment, any day? They know once you process the traumatic memories where those alters or where those personalities were created. Each personality is traced back to a moment or multiple moments, traumatic moments where they were formed. You have to go back to where they were formed if you want to resolve them. You have to go back to those moments and you have to let them see that that's past, that's past tense, that that's not happening now, but you also have to work with them to help to resolve their role, to help to resolve whatever it is, the reason that they were created. So before I get too passionate and get too deep into all of this, I want to talk to you quickly about my journey. And my journey with DID was probably like a lot of you in that I was healing, but I didn't know why I was still having these massive ups and downs. And I didn't know why I still felt like I was somebody else living in somebody else's life. So I had been working with a therapist who does internal family systems, and I started working with her probably in 2020, and we worked through some of my trauma around my dad. So if you don't know my life story, you can listen to episode 1, but my dad was sexually abusive all throughout my entire childhood, raped me when I was a teenager, and his father raped me when I was 7. There was some sadistic abuse. It was a very unsafe childhood with constant abuse. Sexual abuse and DID really do go hand in hand. A lot of women with DID have sexual abuse. And I believe that when the body is violated, like physically, it really accentuates our disconnect from our body. And essentially this is what dissociative amnesia is. Dissociative identity disorder is like an extension of dissociative amnesia, where we were so panicked and so violated that our awareness and our consciousness had to leave our bodies, which is what the act of dissociation is. It's a disconnection from body and from self. We had to leave our bodies. And when you have to leave your body, and when you are sexually abused and you are so confused, you don't understand why it's happening or what's happening to your body, you feel shame, you feel all of these intense emotions, dissociation is the go-to when you can't escape. So a lot of women with DID will have sexual trauma. So I had been working with this therapist who had been helping me work through my parts around connection to my father. I was very connected to my father. I found it really difficult to cut him out of my life because one side loved him excessively and was developed in order to basically forget all of the bad. There was one side that was quite angry, and I'll talk more deeply about these soon, but there was one side that was developed in order to love him excessively, to forget all of the bad, to become completely dissociated to all of the bad. And so I found it really difficult to cut him out of my life. I grieved him deeply, but we'd been working through some things, and then she mentioned some things and she started to look into my current relationship. And at the time I was just not willing to look at it, not willing to leave absolutely terrified. So I stopped seeing her. I came back about a year and a half later, still in the same situation. She brought up the relationship. I disappeared again. I came back about 6 months later, and we kind of did this dance where she was a really good therapist, very aware, would point things out to me that at the time I just wasn't ready to look at or hear. But when I was ready, I knew where to go. So I went back to her. And this is what I've become for so many people, which I love. They know that it's going to be hard and they know I'm going to go get straight into it. So they come to me when the time is right. And I went back to her, and I'd been working with her more intensely for a few months. And she'd got me to watch this documentary, and she pitched it in a way, she'd learned me well, and she'd pitched it in a way that was kind of like, you know, you're a therapist, I think you'd really enjoy this documentary. And this documentary was on DID. And when I came back for my next session, she said, how did you like the documentary? And I was like, oh my gosh, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing how the personalities are created and how the person is split and how their whole identity can change, what they like, their favorite colors, the clothes they wear, their food taste, everything. They have these entire different personalities created. It's so wild. It makes so much sense to me. And she was like, did you relate to it? And I was like, I don't know. And she started to point out to me these two different versions of me, really different versions of me that she had noticed in therapy, that she had noticed that I would go between and bounce between. And the polarizing beliefs and words and things that I would say between these two personalities was wild. For me, the personalities were triggered by relational triggers. My trauma was and this is going to be the same for everybody. The trauma is relational, so people are your triggers. Relationships, connections, people that you love are going to be your biggest triggers. And something would happen in my relationship and it would trigger me to move sides. And when she said it to me, to be completely honest, I instantly felt this level of, how could I not know that? When I know so much about trauma and I knew about dissociative identity disorder, not that deeply until I'd watched the documentary, but it was like, I knew about all of these things. How could I not identify that? And this is where it's kind of obvious, because when you're in it, if I was in myself, in my higher self, I probably would have been able to identify it. But I was literally living between the two personalities, flipping from one to the other, that there was never a point where I could step outside of that to see what I was doing. I was in it. And so when you're in it, it can be really difficult to break out of it. So I'm going to talk to you how I did that, because it was very intuitive and it just happened naturally through me thinking, okay, how do I blend this? And I'll get into that soon. But I basically went from this conversation of, okay, and she started to point it out and she said, there's this Jess and there's this Jess. And I was like, I know those Jesses. And she's like, do you know what their names are? And I'm like, well, they don't have a different name, but I have labeled one of them in my words exactly as Psycho Jess and one as Happy Jess. And they sound just like an expression of self. I mean, and again, when I say expression of self, we all have expressions of self. We have days where we're happy, days where we're sad, days where we're a bit frustrated. We have dance party Jess, we have funeral Jess. We have all different expressions of self and parts that make up ourself. But Happy Jess and Psycho Jess were completely polarizing. They were two completely different people. They were not expressions of one sense of self. They were two people living in one body and hated each other. They would fight. They just hated each other. And so once I named them and I said, yeah, and this is what Psycho Jess is like, and this is what Happy Jess is like, and this is what she thinks, and this is what she thinks, I labeled them out and I could instantly identify once she said it. It was like this light bulb moment. I was like, this one's vegetarian and this one will eat whatever the person that she loves is eating. This one has no personality. This one will unsee everything, forget everything, pretend everything's okay. She's delusional, but she's happy. She's loved, but she's completely dissociated. This one is rebel. This one is fuck everyone, fuck the world, fuck love. You don't need anyone. You're alone. And she had her own sets of values. She had her own dress style. She would speak differently. I got out of this session and I called my mum and I told her, and she was paused for a moment and she was mind blown and she said, I know those two Jesses. I know them really well. I know them. And she would say, this one's like this and this one's like this. And I've seen those two Jesses and, I just thought that it was just you on different days, but I can see now how they are really exaggerated and how you do have those two personality. And from there, I think there was probably about half a day of like, this is bullshit. This is some bullshit. I don't want another diagnosis, or I don't want another thing to have to work through, or, just a little bit of woe is me for half a day. And then my therapy mind kicked in and I was like, nah, how do we fix it? There has to be a way, because, I went in and I did some research, and it was kind of like, you learn to work with those parts, or you can medicate, or you can, do like long-term therapy to kind of turn the volume down on those sides and to make them sort of coexist. But there was no like, how do you resolve it? And my brain straight away was like, well, why are these two sides developed? Why do they exist? Like, why are they there? And this was where I sort of started to get into, okay, well, what does happy Jess want out of life? And what does Psycho Jess want out of life? What are their values? But also, what are they trying to protect? And what they were both trying to protect was my sense of self. But they were doing it in different ways, because they both thought that this is the way to do it. This is the way to live. This is the way to be safe. This is what you have to do in order to be safe. And then this one was like, no, this is what you have to do in order to be safe. And one was like, you just have to forget everything and love deeply. Forget everything. If someone's abusive, push it down, forget it, ignore it. Just love, 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 love. It's all about love. This one would forget. This one forgot nothing. This one would hold you to it. This Psycho Jess side she was like, her ultimate value was freedom. She didn't care about love. When she was triggered, love meant nothing. All she wanted was to escape. All she wanted was to be free. And it makes sense, because all I wanted on one part was to escape and was to be free and was to not be abused anymore. And she had an aversion to being trapped or to feeling suffocated or any of those feelings. Once they would come up strong enough, she would come in and be like, fuck this, we're burning it to the ground. And when I was in that state, I would be so judgmental of myself. I'd be like, why have I been a fucking pushover? Fuck love. Like, who cares about love? And I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm not doing that. And I've been drinking, or I've been eating meat, or I've been dressing a certain way for you, and I've been doing all of this for you, and I'm not that person anymore. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And I would shift, and I would just be in burn it to the ground. Let's get free. Let's get away from everything. Now, this side was very protective. This Psycho Jess she served me well, because she would, even though she was internalized a lot of the time, like she wasn't outwardly able to actually stand up for herself and let her fire out, she was there helping me through it by having, like, as a child, these narratives of like, this is wrong and you're fucked, and one day she was the one that had this narrative of like, one day I'm going to change the world, one day I'm going to take what you did to me and I'm going to help other people. And she has all the fire, and she needed to be suppressed for a really long time, but the more I suppressed her, the bigger and louder she would get. And so sometimes I could be in one personality, I could be in happy Jess for months before I would flick over and be like, what have I been doing? But sometimes it was only a couple of days. Sometimes I would seesaw between the two. And so I started to really look at it, and I started to think about how each of those personalities, or both of those two personalities, weren't wrong, and that they were serving me, and that there were parts of them that were good as well. So even though they were protective and they were like really loud and big and would be quite toxic, there was also parts of them that were true. There were also parts of them that were serving me, one being the deep desire for love and one being the deep desire for freedom. So what I did is I first identified what those parts wanted, what they wanted most, whether it was safety, freedom, love, whatever it is. You need to identify what that part wants and what that part feels like it needs that it's not getting. I wrote it out onto a piece of paper, and I can't recommend this highly enough. Like, map out those parts. Write down their name if you've got a name, or write down what they symbolize. Write down what they love, what they don't love, what they're judgmental against, what they really need. And what I started to do was I would become really self-aware of which part I was in, which personality I was in, And I would challenge myself every day to check in with which personality I was in, because I was so far one or the other. I was never self, I was never centered. So it was like, okay, right now I'm in loving Jess, and I can see that I'm in loving Jess, and I would identify it. I'd be like, I'm not standing up for myself. I'm being really easygoing, go with the flow, but I'm going to get resentful and I'm going to trigger myself into the other side. So what I would do is I would start to lean into the opposite. So if I had one side where I was really loving, I'd challenge myself to do something small, to stand up for myself, to speak up, to do something that makes me feel free, to do something that the other side would do. And if it would trigger me, sometimes it would trigger me all the way into the other side. And then I would have to challenge myself to do something that was soft, challenge myself to do something that was loving, challenge myself to lean back into love. And I was basically, when I was in one side, I was challenging myself to just bring in parts of the other side. Very hard to do, by the way. So what I was doing alongside this was I was working with my own mind, because I can, obviously being qualified to do that, but also with my therapist to uncover what was making them so loud, what was making them so drastically different, and uncovering what all of the small parts were that made up each of those personalities. So bit by bit, I started to tap into, okay, the happy Jess has a part that unsees. Happy Jess has a part that can't deal with what's happening in her world, so she flicks off and shuts down and she unsees. Where does that part come from? What does she look like? How old is she? When did she learn that? And through that process, I would have memories come up of where she was created and when she was created, and I would work on those one at a time. So I worked on the memories and the moments that created each of those personalities, whilst I was also working on blending them and allowing both of them to be okay, allowing both of them to start to accept each other. Now, they kept fighting. They kept being like, I kept having this fight in myself of like, yeah, but I'm pathetic and I didn't stand up for myself and I didn't even say anything. What's wrong with me? And then like, oh, you're too much. You know, my happy side towards my psycho side would be like, you're too much. You're too loud. You're too intense. People don't like you. You know, just a bitch, crazy. There were so many labels that they would each put on each other, that I had to also remove the subconscious beliefs that made up each of the personalities. Like I'm crazy, like I'm pathetic, like I'm a psycho, like, you know, I unsee everything, like I'm too intense, like I have no backbone. I'd be going between the two and looking at the subconscious beliefs that made them up, whilst working with the parts that made those personalities, until I got to a point where I felt like they could meet. And what I did was I actually got them to meet. And you might be thinking, well, I have multiple personalities and I have multiple parts that make up each of my personalities. I've got 10, 6, 20, whatever personalities. That's okay. Just get two to meet at once. Just get two at a time that you want to focus on, and then focus on the next ones. I think you'll find that the people who have two really distinct ones, there are a lot of parts that make up those two personalities. Whereas people who actually fragment into more very distinct personalities, those personalities can just have one or two parts that make up that personality. So volume wise of like parts, it's still the same level of work and it's still achievable. It's still doable. So I got them to meet. And I got them to have a conversation, and I looked at what happened. I did this with a therapist. I highly recommend you do this with a therapist. Side note, this is why I created the one-on-one online clinic and why I have trained the 6 women in there within an inch of their life around personality disorders, sexual trauma, complex trauma. They know everything that I'm talking to you about right now, and they are very capable of working through all of this with you. This is why I trained them, because there is such a need for therapists who actually know how to do this work. So I got them to meet, I got them to speak, and through their dialogue, I got to unpack what else they were still hating about each other, where they were different and where they were polarizing, but where they were also the same. And what I came to realize is that both of them, and I communicated this with those parts, both of them were protecting the same thing. Both of them were protecting myself, my sense of self, which was my inner child, which was this child who was confused and who didn't know how to cope with the situation. So she created two different versions, two different realities. And so all of your parts, all of your personalities, all of your alters are protecting an inner child. They're protecting an inner child that they think is still in danger, is still requiring their protection. And so through the process of memory processing, they can start to learn that that child isn't unsafe anymore. That child is actually safe. She's with us. She's healed. She's healthy. She's well. They can start to learn that through this process of memory processing and also resolving them. So giving those parts or giving those personalities, giving those alters, once we've talked to them, once we've uncovered the memory where they were created and we've shifted the subconscious beliefs, the negative things that we've attached to them, we can give them a new role. So for instance, for my psycho side, if there was if there was this really fiery part of my personality, her new role would be to use that fire, instead of burning her life to the ground, to use her fire to speak up, to use her fire to get her opinions out into the world to help other people. So all of a sudden I would shift that narrative from like, you don't have to help this little inner child anymore. She's happy, she's healthy, she's well, she's loved. You can use your fire to help the world now. And so I assigned her a new role. So you can assign these new roles, but also at the same time, whilst you're basically unpacking each of these personalities, you're bringing them back into self and you're creating a new personality, a new personal reality, a new sense of self, a new version of you that you actually want to be. Because the personalities that you've developed have developed out of survival, not out of desire, not out of want, not out of this is who I'd love to be, this is how I'd love to show up. And as you work with each of those individual parts, you get to decide who they want to be now. You get to use desire and consciousness to go, you know what? I want to keep her, and this is going to be her new job now. This is how she's going to become a part of my life. And then all of a sudden, once we've done all of those, and once we've started to resolve and find new roles for them, they can start to come together with ease and create this new sense of self, this one identity of I am Jess, and these are all my expressions of self. I'm fiery and I'm loving. I'm empathetic and I'm savage. And I can be all of those things at once. And that's what makes me, because that's who I decided that I wanted to be. They're all the parts that I decided to keep, but they're clean. They're not coming from I need to be safe, I need to act this way in order to protect myself. They're coming from me just being like, this is who I want to be. This is who I want to show up as. So you can tell when a part is still protective and when it's still controlling you, when you get triggered easily, when it's reactive and when it's chaotic. Whereas if I can intentionally choose to be savage, or I can intentionally choose to be loving, I'm not being pulled in different directions anymore. I'm in control of who I want to be and how I want to show up. So this is my journey. This is what I did. I hope you've been taking notes. I've just kind of regurgitated out all of the information as I kind of recall those steps. But really at the end of the day, it's work. It's just getting to know the parts first. And, I think about, I read the book, like a book on IFS, which is internal family systems. And the theory here is there's no bad parts. And I believe this so deeply. None of those parts are bad. They can be frustrating. Don't get me wrong. It can be frustrating, especially when you flick into another part. And if you're like me, my parts would just shame the other part all the time. And it was so frustrating to just hate myself constantly. But they are there to serve you. They're there to protect you. They think that they need to protect you from something. And so it is a process of going through the memories and correctly processing those memories with a therapist in the online clinic who knows how to do it correctly, so that those parts can realize that they don't need to keep protecting you anymore. They can actually thrive now. They can look towards the future. They can have a new role, a more uplifted role. So that is my healing journey with DID. I think probably I could go on about this subject forever. So I am in the future going to answer questions more specifically, but at the bottom line of everything, this is the work that needs to be done. We need to be compassionate. We need to be loving towards ourselves, towards our parts, and we need to shift our perspective from what's wrong with me to how has this served me? How has this protected me? And what can I do to let this part know that it no longer needs to protect me? What can I do to resolve it? Let's not manage it anymore. Let's not just get into this mindset of like, how can I just manage this? How can I cope with it? Let's stop coping, let's stop managing, and let's start healing. Let's start getting to the deeper root cause. And I know it's scary. I know it's so scary to book therapy. I know it's so scary to go into those memories and to talk to those parts, and it can feel so intense. But what you're afraid of is an emotion. You can heal, and that healing is possible. And so, as I mentioned, if you have any other questions, please reach out to me. Thank you again for listening to this episode. I hope that you have got what you needed from it. Again, for those people who have those multiple variety of, of alters, of parts, and it feels chaotic and you feel like you're everywhere, I want you to see if you can start to characterize them into groups as well, because originally I thought that there was multiple. And once I actually wrote it down, they really did fit into these like two separate categories. So get your piece of paper out, mind map it out, write those parts, write those alters out, and start to get to know them with love and compassion. Thank you again for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.